Hey everyone, you don't want to know what's going on in Aiken, you want to know what's shaking in Aiken. It's your host, Brian Katonic, Aiken native, and we have a very fun show today. So if you don't know, the reason Aiken's here is because of trains. So I thought nothing better than to have one of the heads of the Aiken Train Depot, Sam Ellis, with me. So Sam, how you doing today?
I'm good. How are you doing, Brian?
I am fantastic. So, a lot of people have moved to Aiken. They love Aiken. They like the downtown. They like everything, but they probably don't know that Aiken is here because of trains. Is that right?
That is absolutely correct. We were incorporated as a town officially in 1835, but the stage had already been set a little bit earlier than that with the Charleston to Hamburg line and the South Carolina Canal and Railroad Company out of Charleston. And just through a confluence of different elements, certain decisions were made that drove the railroad in our direction. And then they were at a sort of pivotal juncture where they could have routed the train north of us or gone straight through Aiken. And they discovered sort of a really innovative solution on how to get the train upgrade into Aiken and then downgrade into Horse Creek Valley. And we pretty much owe our existence to that decision being made.
Okay. And so with the train coming through here, was it a fact were people getting off the train and kind of just hanging out and there was a need for a town to kind of grow up at that point?
Well, the device called the incline plane was sort of our main contribution to the Charleston to Hamburg project. You've got to understand this is well before air brakes were invented. This is well before sort of modern equipment was developed to create safe travel up and down grade. So they created a device because the Horse Creek Valley, that descent out of Aiken towards the Savannah River is so steep. They're like, well, we can't navigate this. And they created a device called the incline plane, which works fundamentally like an elevator for trains. It's a set
Right.
of parallel tracks with a engine house at the top that has a stationary steam engine that runs a winch, and it would lower one car upgrade and another car downgrade simultaneously. And so that made that navigation of that steep grade possible. And because it was such a sort of extensive process, it was not a quick process. There were people who had been on the train for 12 hours, 14 hours, and they were, they were hungry, they were thirsty. And if you were an enterprising merchant, what would you do? Well, you would find a way to sell them what they need, which is a place to stay, a place, to get something to eat, a place to get a drink. And the town sort of developed out of that.
Right. And the town came from the name of the man who had the idea for the railroad, right?
Well, he and some other gentlemen had the idea for the railroad, but he was the primary stakeholder. He was the primary investor. So we are named after William Aiken, who was the first president of the South Carolina Canal and Railroad Company.
Right. And if I'm right, Sam, you tell me if I'm not. I think by the time the railroad was completed, hadn't he died in a accident, like fell off a horse or something like that?
Yes, ironically enough, and the story goes, is that the train actually spooked his horse and his horse threw him. And so unfortunately, he never lived to see the town that was named after him.
How about that? Isn't that crazy? Okay, that first train comes through, but then later on, around the turn of the century, I think that they built a large train depot in Aiken. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. And where was that located?
Um, the original depot for the Charleston to Hamburg line was actually next door to where we're located on 406 Park, next door in Giles Park.
Okay.
And then there was a second depot, which was across the street, which accommodated traffic through the Aiken Cut, which was completed in 1852. But the Aiken Train Museum, which is a replica of the 1899 Southern Railway Depot, was actually our third depot facility, and it was a Southern Railway facility. They already owned the land, and so we are currently in a replica of that facility.
How about that? Okay. And how long was that facility around for?
Like I said, it was built in 1899. Passenger service ceased coming to Aiken around 1950. The automobile and other inventions just sort of limited the need for passenger service. And so the original building was torn down in around 1954.
Okay. But I believe at one time, and you correct me again, wasn't like there a train from New York to Aiken to bring winter colony people down here?
There actually were some sort of what I would consider trial efforts to bring the winter colonists down here, but the route was relatively inefficient in that they would have to come down from Washington, D.C., New York, D.C., to Columbia, all the way down to Branchville, and then be routed up the Charleston to Hamburg line towards Aiken. But I think the train most people are familiar with or should know about is the Aiken Augusta Special, which actually went down. There was another railroad, and I believe it was created in around 1869, and that's the Charlotte, Columbia, and Aiken, and that's currently Norfolk Southern's R line, and that's what fascinates me because it's still in service for freight service today. But they would bring the train down to Columbia and route it towards Trenton. At which point they would split the train into two trains, and the cars bound for Augusta would continue to Augusta, and the coaches with the wealthy winter colonists would be put on a second train and brought to Aiken from Trenton.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so the train tracks you see downtown, I mean, there's a track right beside the train depot. So is that still used right now?
It is used. It's used by the Aiken Railway Company, who leases it from Norfolk Southern. They actually own two short lines, one up near Greer, South Carolina, and the other being here in Aiken.
Okay. So I know the train depot was an idea for a while. And so when did it finally come to fruition and open up?
It took a lot of planning and a lot of fundraising. I think the original sort of seed of the idea dates back to probably 1999. And it was probably a decade of fundraising and planning and organizing before they really got started. But construction was completed in 2010, and that's when we officially opened.
Okay. And what is the primary purpose of the depot for visitors?
I think it's just to familiarize and acclimate not just newcomers to Aiken, but people who have been in Aiken for quite some time who may not be as familiar with our rail history, to sort of reacclimate them and acquaint them with how significant the railroad was to us in a fun and educational way. That way everybody can sort of, take a little bit of pride and ownership in that rail legacy that we have here.
So my favorite part, probably most people's favorite part, is upstairs where they have the little railroad that goes through the various towns. Can you tell us exactly what that is?
That's sort of the crown jewel of our museum program. That is the big exhibit, and it actually is a replica of 9 different towns in HO scale, which is a very standardized model railroad scale, and it depicts the original 9 station stops on the way from Charleston to Hamburg, which was the terminus of the Charleston to Hamburg Railroad.
Okay.
So it covers Somerville, it covers St. George, Denmark, Blackville, Branchville, and of course Aiken, and then Hamburg.
Right. Do you know who made all those little villages? I mean, they are really well done and everything. Do you know who was there a company that did it or individual who made all the little villages?
Well, a gentleman named Don Barnes was responsible for the historic research, and he went as far deep. I mean, he went way down the rabbit hole. He was going to these different station stops, these different towns, and interviewing people, asking people if they had photographs, and referring to Sanborn insurance maps, and any kind of information he could get was put to use. Old postcards, old newspaper clippings. And so he tried to make them sort of as accurate as possible. But the actual labor was the responsibility of a company called Custom Model Railroads out of Baltimore.
Okay.
And they sort of followed Don's lead with regards to his research, and they scratch built buildings, including, a HO scale Aiken Depot, the big depot in Charleston. And so it was quite a labor, and it took about 2 years to complete.
How about that? So basically, when you see each little town, that is, as far as we know, accurate what the town was back in the day when the train did go through there.
If aerial photograph had existed and they had taken a picture from the sky at that juncture, it would have looked probably within 95 to 100% accuracy of what's depicted in our dioramas.
How about that? How about that? So, folks, if you go there, I mean, you can't miss it. You go upstairs, and it's really interesting to see all of that. So, as far as with the community, do you have school groups coming in there and get educated?
We have school groups come quite often, and I'll be honest with you, that's probably my favorite part of the job, because the kids just. I grew up rail fanning with my dad, and that's part of the reason I'm here. And I don't know, we live in this age where kids love video games and they're on their telephones. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with that, but it's cool to be able to acclimate them with a history that they sort of have some ownership of that they
Right.
have no idea actually exists. So it sort of opens their eyes to sort of an extensive history. Aiken has a really cool history.
It really does. It really does. So let me ask you, Sam, there's two railroad cars outside of the museum. Tell us, what are those?
Those are two Pullman heavyweight coaches. One is from 1918, and one there's been some back and forth, a little bit of contention, but we're doing the research. We believe it's from 1916. But the Pullman heavyweight coach is actually the car most indicative of what would have brought the winter colonists to Aiken.
All right. Would those have been like dining coaches or where people slept? What were the use for those coaches?
Well, Pullman Company started, and his big thing, George Pullman's big thing, was sleeping cars.
Okay.
But the cars bound for Aiken were generally privately owned, and therefore more often outfitted like a home on rails. So if you went inside and you outfitted, it could have a dining room, it could have a bar, it could have sleeping quarters, it could have a lounge. But one of our cars was originally a lounge car, and then the other was retrofitted to be an observation car, which accounts for the sort of open balcony on the back.
I got you. I got you. So, Sam, I think at one point years ago, there was some talk of maybe having a one of the cars or a different car to actually be a dining car so people could come and actually have a dining experience. Am I right about that?
That idea has sort of evolved and changed, and we've batted around different ideas how best to use the cars, and we sort of determined because we are a replica of a depot, we are not designed necessarily to be a museum and spaces of a premium.
Hmm.
I think we're working on plans right now to use them as sort of a museum annex. The 1918 car is actually going to be converted into a library car, a research car. And we had two gentlemen on our board who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago, and they just had extensive collections of railroad paraphernalia and books and materials, and their wives were kind enough to donate their collection.
Oh,
So it
nice.
will be a gentleman named Bob Smoke and another gentleman named Roy McLean, and we are just grateful for those contributions. And so one of them will actually be a railroad resource library, and we're very excited about that.
Right. Bob Smoke, you probably know, was a judge here in Aiken for a long time. And back when I was practicing law, you went up to his office at the courthouse. He had a train in the courthouse. So it was,
I don't doubt it one bit. Bob was the best of the best, and I tell you, the thing about Bob is that if I live 6 lifetimes, I will still not know as much as he probably about railroading as he probably had in his pinky. He was the guy to go to. He would, if somebody brought a model train in, and he'd be like, "Oh, well, this is a whatever from 1927. It would have had a red roof on its cabin, not black. This is absolutely incorrect."
right,
And,
right,
and just the breadth of knowledge he had was a real resource and a real blessing to us.
right, right, right. So Sam, besides getting knowledge about the train, the depot also kind of serves as a visitor center for Aiken. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. So new people coming to town, they can get information about where to shop and eat and all that kind of stuff.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. And then I also think on Saturdays, is that where the trolley starts and stops for the trolley
Yeah,
tour?
the Aiken Historic Trolley Tour actually departs from the Aiken Depot and returns to the Aiken Depot.
All right. And folks, another great thing that Depot does, if you want to have a party or an event there, they actually rent it out. I've had two events there. It's very affordable. It's a great place for a party. You can have it inside, you can have it outside. There's what would you call the deck on the outside? Like an observation deck? What would that be?
We do have a deck on the back. I have to correct you there just a second. We stopped doing rentals shortly after I took the job. So it's
Did
no
they
longer
really?
available for rentals,
Okay.
unfortunately. As we push forward more with the museum initiatives, that just kind of not became the strategy we needed to adhere to. The deck is still certainly available for rental, but the facility itself is not.
I got you. Well, the deck itself is really large, and if it's a nice day, it's a great place to have a party at. So, well, fantastic. So, Sam, how long have you been with the train depot?
Tomorrow, believe it or not, tomorrow is my 2-year anniversary.
Well, good, good, good. Are you from Aiken, or what's your background?
Born and raised, 41 years.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, if you guys have not been down there, it's a great thing for Aiken to have. It's interesting. It's a fun thing. You can take kids, take the whole family. It's a great way to learn about Aiken because again, our background is based on trains. So, Sam, thanks for coming on here, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Okay, summer's almost here, so you know what you need? You need that new cool hairdo. Yeah, you don't want to be sweating down at the beach or the lake. You want to be looking good. So what you want to do is call up Carrie at Blue Cottage Salon. She'll take care of you, give you the latest hairdo, give you a little cut, fix those nails, whatever you need for your beauty, she can take care of it. So Blue Cottage Salon and Spa, located in a historic building on Chesterfield Street in downtown Aiken. Give her a call today, 803-221-5945. Okay, over the last week or so, we've had a lot of controversy in city politics. So first, there's been a proposal to build a tiny house community off Dykes Road for the homeless. So it's a fantastic idea, I think. Get the homeless people out of tents. And folks, there really are a lot of homeless around. You might not see them, but there are. Build tiny houses for them, give them a place to live, get them off the streets, give them a new fresh start of life. Homeless is something that no one wants the homeless, but no one wants the homeless in their community. So they're before the council, make a proposal, and due to people showing up and expressing displeasure, they've tabled the issue and hope to come back on it. So again, we don't want the homeless on the streets, but people don't want it near them either. So that was controversy number one. Controversy number two has to do with the bridge at Fairfield Street, downtown Aiken. So for about the past 10 years, this bridge has been closed down. The city owns the bridge, and they've been looking for funding to build a new bridge. So they've secured funding. They came up with plans similar to the bridge at York Street, went forward with these plans, went before the design review board last week. And after a 2.5-hour meeting where they're basically being shot down, the city decided to withdraw their plans and go back to the drawing board. And the people on the design review board basically want a bridge that's more historic or possibly a pedestrian bridge. I'm definitely all for history in Aiken, keeping our roots. But again, at one point in history in downtown Aiken, the streets were made out of dirt and there were streetcars. We have to progress with the times. I know the city went a long time getting funding for this bridge they were going to build, and who knows how long it will be before they're able to get funding and come back to the table. I know people that live down Fairfield Street hate seeing a closed bridge they can't use, but it may be a while before they get something. So I hope the leaders of this community can work together and come to a solution about this bridge so it will better the community as a whole. It's funny, I was just recently reading a book about the building of the Brooklyn Bridge, and when it was built, actually a lot of people in Manhattan did not want the bridge built. They did not think it was something they needed in their community. Of course, that was 100 years ago, and the Brooklyn Bridge has done pretty well. So let's get the bridge built. Let's try to work together. And one thing that concerns me sometimes about Aiken is people do not want to be progressive into having change. I'm not saying that all change is good, but change is going to be necessary for a city to continue to develop and prosper. If you go over to North Augusta, their downtown, it's quite amazing what they have done there. The baseball field complex, the riverfront, all that. If they would propose a baseball stadium in Aiken, it would have taken 50 years to get built. But North Augusta is much more far thinking and much more willing to make the community better. So I hope Aiken steps up and people don't want to just sit on their hands and say, we don't want anything to change, because that's just not realistic if they want this town to continue to prosper. Okay, I hope you enjoyed the show. Head on down to the Train Museum. It really is a lot of fun. Take the whole family. You're going to enjoy it. Have a nice weekend. It's going to be beautiful outside. And so just remember, you don't want to know what's going on in Aiken. You want to know what's shaking Aiken. See you next time.